And now, for a session produced by our underwriter, please welcome Grace Showalter, Vice President for Construction Performance Materials North America at BASF. Deane Evans, Executive Director of the Centers for Building Knowledge and Resilient Design at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And Joseph Jones, Innovation Communications Lead at BASF.
All right. Great, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here with Grace and Deane. So what we're going to talk about this morning is sustainable construction and the steps we can take for the future in terms of building a more resilient infrastructure. And I think just this morning, the New York Times had a story talking about the expectation that global warming is getting worse. And I think these topics play directly into what can we do about that from an infrastructure perspective. Certainly the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration feels the same way. They've said that they expect sea levels to rise at a higher level in the future over the course of decades, progressively worse than we're already experiencing today. And when you consider that nearly 40% of Americans live in highly densely populated coastal areas, this creates the scenario for further flood damage, for shoreline erosion, for storm hazards, and damage not only to infrastructure and property, but personal safety. So I think all of these issues play into this question. And so, Deane, I would direct my first question towards you is essentially, what do we do about this from an infrastructure design perspective? What can be done to combat this and to protect our cities, in particular coastal cities in the future?
Thanks, Joe. I think that the issue, I think we need innovation both in technology and materials and in design. I think it's starting to happen. At the scale of new construction, I'm focused on buildings. New construction, I think, has an opportunity to sort of do a double whammy in the sense that if you design and build well, you can actually reduce the impacts of climate through energy efficiency and some of the other ideas we've talked about today. But in addition, if you can combine that with resilient construction at the same time, then you win and you prevent the impacts of these hazards. So for example, a project that we've worked on in Breezy Point, Long Island does that. It's a showcase, but it's an example of a project that can work that's both sustainable and resilient. That said, the big problem is the existing infrastructure that we've got, both at the large scale and at the building scale. How do you deal with that? One of the issues that we're trying to grapple with at our centers is the concept of opportunistic retrofitting, because we've heard from previous panels, there ain't a lot of money out there relative to the need. How do you take advantage of what you're doing anyway to improve its resilience and energy performance? We're looking at that right now with re-siding jobs, kind of a dull topic. Kind of a dull topic, is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Should I start over? For those of you who can hear me, I'm talking about something called opportunistic retrofitting. And at the level of the building, like say a home, people re-side their homes. There's 1 million re-siding jobs every year in the US. None of them are done for resilience. Very few are done for energy efficiency. If we could improve those processes, re-roofing, very basic stuff, we can improve both the climate impact and the resilience of those facilities. Likewise, at the level of bigger scale infrastructure, we heard a little bit before from Baltimore, from Lisa, the idea that you layer in resilience into your planning processes, and particularly your capital budgets. How do you optimize money you're going to spend anyway to make it more resilient? And this takes a longer term perspective. How do you do it over time? Same with your home. How do you think of a longer time frame in order to layer in resilience over time?
Yeah, so just to come back to Breezy Point. So Breezy Point is a location that was heavily impacted by a superstorm Sandy. BASF and with key partners came together, and we wanted to use this as an opportunity to build a model home. And we built it with existing technology. There is ample technology available today in combination with the right design in order to build for a more sustainable and resilient future. The key to the success of this project is actually that partners from various parts of the value chain came together to work on the same goals in order to educate and influence policy.
Yeah, and Breezy Point, for those here today, there's some video of that Breezy Point project out in the lobby in our display, so you can take a look at that. But certainly this idea of superstorms and severe weather events has become more pronounced over the course of the last year. New York, New Jersey, where Deane and I are from, certainly Sandy we're still recovering from that event. But you look at coastal California, Texas Gulf Coast, Florida Peninsula, all of these areas are being hit over and over again. So I guess, Grace, the question for you, are we at a point now in this cycle where we should really mandate that resilient design and construction criteria become a national mandate, and particularly in these heavily vulnerable coastal areas?
Yeah, so a strong mandate is a challenge because building codes happen at the local level. To me, a better approach is to go to locales where they're high risk. Perhaps the communities are familiar already with the risk and maybe even have experience in the past. Again, we have to work with partners because as industry alone, it's difficult to do. We have to work with designers, with architects, with local government, with the codes officials to come together and design and build and go from a locale up. Again, I really think it's about education and prevention. That's the key, starting with the high-risk areas.
Yeah, I agree. And actually on those fronts, in terms of mandates, I think there's some things that play in our favor right now. Unfortunately, the number of storms that have been occurring recently and the fires and everything else that's in the news all the time, including this morning, make people much more aware of this than they would have been maybe 10 or even 15 years ago. Superstorm Sandy came, it went away. There was a lot of action in Jersey and New York for 3-4 years. And then, pardon the pun, it began to ebb. Now it's in the news all the time. So public awareness is ready for this type of education and intervention. The second good news is that the codes continually upgrade, the building codes in the world I work in, based on field research. So they're constantly moving forward in these arenas, so they'll get better and better over time. And the third, for me just personally recently, I've been dealing with FEMA a bit, and I've worked with them over many years, and they're getting much more interested in granular mitigation at the community scale, which is very interesting for them in terms of trying to push people toward mitigation strategies earlier in the process, so they're not only reacting in recovery later. And FEMA's been engaged with this for a long time, but now it seems to be getting much more granular, which I think is good news for everybody out in the field.
Grace?
I can have that for a second. I think someone mentioned this earlier when we were in the back prepping, but did you know that for every dollar spent for pre-disaster mitigation, we save $11 in recovery? Also, in the last 5 years, U.S. spent $50 billion in disaster recovery, $10 billion each year. That kind of spending is not sustainable. Therefore, to me, key and meaningful progress has to happen with pre-disaster mitigation, with how to rebuild for sustainability and for resilience.
Yeah, well said. So I think we talked a bit about smart design, about smart retrofitting, the need for education and awareness, also the role public policy can play here. But I think there's also an important part that innovation can play in this topic, particularly in the form of, let's say, more disaster durable building materials and solutions. I know, Grace, this is something you work on every day. So what can you share with us and tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the market, bringing it to the market, and what we expect in the future?
There's really a lot of existing technology already available today, and we use them in some cases, but not enough, and not for disaster rebuild and for disaster prevention. So again, the key is about bringing these solutions with the right partners. There are many partners involved, so this becomes a challenge. And like I said, it really happens at a local level. It's fragmented, so it takes time for us to do this. For future challenges, I would tell you that companies like us, like BASF, and our partners in the industry, we have a lot of great sustainable solutions on the shelves already that we're not using today. Our company really employs an army of scientists and PhD scientists to do exactly this. We have developed solutions. We're also looking for needs in the industry to develop further solutions. So we're ready. I have no doubt that we can really meet any challenge that's out there for building better, for building for sustainability, and building for resilience. But the key is coming together with the right partners.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I think that in the construction world and the building world, the opportunities are in front of us in terms of innovation and technology. If we go back to the example I was using on resiting, right? Right now we're doing it as an energy performance enhancement, but if we began to set the performance parameters higher than that, how can you, in a re-roofing job or a resiting job, make a home really resilient to, say, low-level flooding, nuisance flooding, normal flooding, wind, et cetera, et cetera. I think new technologies, if that performance goal is set up as a challenge, new technologies will follow. And the same thing is true at the bigger, from my perspective, infrastructure scale. We're doing a lot in the New York metro region about influencing policy, growing public awareness of the region in New York, New Jersey, and a little bit of Connecticut around these issues. And then that's going to lead ultimately to policy and then maybe regulation and other things, or just at least new policies. But what hasn't emerged is, okay, you get a policy in place for some kind of flooding mitigation strategy. It typically is strategies that are already tried and true. They've been done before. Industry's not at the table as these decisions are being made, and the challenges of some kind of riverine flood protection isn't percolating through into industrial innovation, job creation, those kinds of things. So I think that's a really interesting opportunity that resilience, sustainability, and green certainly led to that. And we see the kinds of innovation technologies that are happening now. I think resilience could as well.
All right, thank you very much. Well, it sounds like the challenges obviously are very real, in some cases getting worse, but there's also reason for optimism, I think, as we look forward. And so I thank you both very much for your insightful comments, as I'm losing my voice. And thanks very, very much for listening to us today. Thanks.